The Dakota Badlands stretched mercilessly before Sarah Whitcomb as she dragged the makeshift travois, carrying her twin daughters, their feverish faces paler than the rising moon. Behind her, the charred skeleton of her family's homestead still smoldered against the twilight sky, the bodies of her husband and his brother already growing cold amid the ruins. Ahead lay nothing but windswept prairie and the quiet certainty of death. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. From the shadow of a distant ridgeline, a pair of ice-blue eyes tracked her desperate journey through the scope of a weathered Sharps rifle. Isaiah Stone, once the most feared scout on the frontier and now a ghost to the civilization that had betrayed him, lowered his weapon and made a decision that would alter both their fates forever. The winter of 1878 had descended upon the Dakota Territory with unusual cruelty. November had barely arrived when the first blizzard swept across the prairie, burying homesteads and freezing cattle where they stood. Those settlers who had prepared inadequately faced a grim reckoning: starvation, exposure, or the humiliation of abandoning their claims and retreating eastward. For Isaiah Stone, the punishing weather was merely another season in the unforgiving rhythm of a land he had come to understand better than his own scarred soul. At 45, the former Army scout had spent nearly a decade alone in the territory's most forbidding reaches, hunting only what he needed to survive and avoiding all contact with the settlements that continued to sprout across what had once been wilderness. His cabin stood nestled against a bluff that sheltered it from the prevailing winds, its weathered logs and stone chimney nearly invisible against the natural formations surrounding it. To the untrained eye, it might have appeared as just another outcropping of rock and wood, unremarkable in the vastness of the Dakota Badlands. This careful concealment was precisely what Isaiah had cultivated during the years since he'd vanished. From official records, Isaiah's once raven-black hair now hung in silver-streaked strands to his shoulders, often bound with a simple leather cord. His face, deeply etched with lines of experience and hardship, rarely revealed the thoughts behind. His penetrating blue eyes, his right leg, noticeably stiff when the weather turned cold, bore testament to the Sioux arrow that had nearly ended his life during the infamous Spencer Creek massacre. The massacre that had made him both legend and pariah among whites and natives. Alike, the scout who had led 54 settlers into an ambush, the sole survivor who couldn't explain why he alone had been spared. Though the military inquiry had eventually cleared him of collusion with the attacking warriors, the whispers never stopped. The celebrated scout who had become careless, the blood that couldn't be washed away. So Isaiah had disappeared, traveling northward until the land itself provided the isolation he craved. Here, he continued to hone his skills in solitude, tracking, hunting, reading the subtle language of wind and weather, animal sign and star position. His cabin contained tools and weapons that would have been the envy of any frontiersman. Custom-modified rifles with extraordinary range, traps of his own design that worked with remarkable efficiency, and a collection of Lakota and Cheyenne medicines gathered during his years living among them before the wars. Though he no longer guided emigrant trains or cavalry patrols, Isaiah maintained the disciplines that had once made him legendary, each day a regiment of survival that required neither explanation nor witness. His routine rarely varied. Each morning began before dawn with a careful patrol of the area surrounding his cabin, checking for tracks, human or animal, that might signal danger. After tending to his meager livestock, 2 horses and 3 goats kept in a sheltered pen, he would spend hours hunting or working hides, break only for a sparse meal at midday, then continue until darkness made such activities impossible. This particular afternoon had started differently. A column of black smoke on the southern horizon had caught his attention during his daily patrol. Prairie fires were common enough in the dry seasons, but in the dead of winter, with snow still blanketing much of the ground, such smoke carried a different message. Isaiah had tracked the disturbance through 5 miles of broken country, moving with the silent efficiency that had once earned him the Lakota name Ghost Walker. What he discovered from his vantage point on the ridge was the unmistakable aftermath of violence. A homestead engulfed in flames, 2 bodies sprawled in the yard, and a lone figure struggling away from the destruction, dragging something behind. "Her! Damn fools," he muttered, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Building out this far from the settlements." The Whitaker feud had been growing more vicious, according to the fragments of information Isaiah gleaned during his infrequent, anonymous visits to the distant trading post. 2 families, Whitaker and Reynolds, locked in a generations-old blood rivalry that had followed them from Kentucky to the Dakota Territory. The burning homestead fit their pattern: ambush, murder, no witnesses left to identify the perpetrators. Except it appeared there was one survivor struggling northward towards certain death. The nearest settlement was 30 miles away, across terrain that would challenge even experienced plainsmen in winter conditions. Isaiah had prepared to turn back toward his cabin when he caught the unmistakable sound, faint but clear in the prairie air. A child's cry, followed by another, identical in pitch. Twins. Something long dormant stirred in his chest. An unwelcome intruder in the fortress of his isolation. He raised his spyglass again, focusing more carefully on the figure below. A woman barely more than a girl, dragging not possessions, but a makeshift travois on which 2 small shapes huddled beneath blood-stained blankets, while she herself faced the bitter cold with only a thin coat torn at the shoulder. Yet, as he turned to leave, the faces from Spencer Creek flashed before him. The women and children who had trusted his guidance, their features forever frozen in that last moment of terror before the Sioux arrows found them. Faces that visited him in dreams, accusing him not of treachery as the newspaper accounts had implied, but of the greater sin, the arrogance that had made him disregard the warning signs along the trail, the pride that wouldn't allow him to admit that his favored route might be compromised. "Not your concern," he told himself firmly, securing his rifle across his back. "Natural selection. Government keeps sending farmers to ranching country. Nature keeps sending them back in boxes." He had taken 3 steps back toward his cabin when the children's cries came again, sharper now, more desperate, sounds that belonged to life, not to the realm of death that surrounded him. Isaiah stopped, his breath forming small clouds that dissipated in the frigid air. Down in the valley, the woman stumbled, falling to her knees before struggling back to her feet, her determination visible even at this distance. She was fighting. With everything she had, not for herself, he realized, but for the children. In that moment, something shifted in Isaiah Stone, imperceptible perhaps to anyone else, but seismic within the carefully constructed fortress of his isolation. Not compassion. Exactly, for he had buried that alongside the Spencer Creek dead, but recognition. Recognition of a will to survive that matched the harsh landscape itself. Cursing under his breath, he changed direction, moving swiftly down the ridge toward the struggling figure. His approach was silent, years of stalking game and avoiding. Hostile war parties having taught him to move across the prairie without sound. The woman didn't notice him until he was 30 yards away, and when she did, her reaction surprised him. Instead of relief, she whirled to place herself between him and the travois, producing an old Colt revolver, which she aimed at him with a trembling but determined hand. "Stop right there," she warned, her voice hoarse from cold and exertion. "I've got nothing worth stealing, and I'll kill you before you touch my daughters." Isaiah raised his hands slowly, keeping his distance. "I'm not with them," he said, his voice rough from disuse, "the ones who attacked your place." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Her eyes, bright with fever yet alert with maternal instinct, assessed him warily. "Then who are you? Someone from the fort?" "You won't survive the night out here," he said, ignoring her question. He gestured toward the distant clouds gathering on the northern horizon. "Another storm's coming." The woman swayed slightly, the revolver dipping before she steadied it. "How do I know I can trust you?" "You don't," Isaiah answered truthfully. "But those children will be dead within hours in this cold, and you not long after." At the mention of her daughters, something broke in the woman's resolve. She glanced back at the travois, where small whimpering sounds had replaced the earlier cries. The children's faces, visible now to Isaiah, had a bluish tinge around the lips that spoke of advancing hypothermia. "I can't," the woman began, then stumbled forward as her strength finally failed. Isaiah moved quickly, catching her before she fell. The revolver dropped harmlessly into the snow as she collapsed against him. He pried the weapon from her grasp and tucked it into his belt, then examined the travois. Two identical girls, perhaps, 5 years old, lay bundled together beneath blood-soaked blankets. Their breathing was shallow, faces flushed with fever despite the cold. One had a crude bandage around her arm. The other appeared uninjured but equally ill. Isaiah recognized the symptoms immediately: wound fever spreading rapidly. Working swiftly, he secured the woman over his shoulder, adjusted the travois harness to his own frame, and began the arduous journey back to his cabin. The travois, designed for a woman's desperate strength, moved more easily under his power, but still slowed his normally swift pace through the broken terrain. By the time they reached his hidden dwelling, the first heavy snowflakes of the new storm were beginning to fall, gradually erasing their tracks behind them. Inside, Isaiah worked with practiced efficiency, building up the fire in his hearth to a roaring blaze, then creating pallets of furs near its warmth. He placed the children there first, noting the quality of their clothes beneath the travel dirt. And blood, not wealthy but respectable, the kind of people who came west with dreams instead of desperation. Dangerous people to be in territory where dreams made you vulnerable. The girls, identical in every feature, had stopped crying, a dangerous sign. Working quickly, Isaiah heated water, adding herbs from a leather pouch he kept by the fire. He bathed their feverish faces and removed the makeshift bandage from the injured girl's arm, revealing a deep gash that had begun to fester. The wound would need cleaning and proper dressing, but first he needed to break their fevers. As Isaiah tended to the children, the woman began to stir. She sat up abruptly, her hand instinctively reaching for the weapon no longer at her side. "My daughters," she gasped, her eyes wild with fear as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. "There," Isaiah nodded toward the fur pallets where the twins lay. "The wounded one needs attention. Both have fever." The woman crawled to her children, gathering their small hands in hers. Relief and terror warred on her face as she assessed their condition. "Emma's arm," she whispered, touching the injured child's forehead. "They said it was just a warning. That next time—" She couldn't continue. "Hold her still," Isaiah instructed, returning with a basin of hot water and clean cloths. "This will hurt her, but infections set in. Has to be cleaned properly." The woman nodded, positioning herself to hold her daughter securely. As Isaiah began the painful process of cleaning the wound, the child cried out weakly, her sister echoing the sound, though no one touched her, a connection beyond ordinary understanding. "Twins often feel each other's pain," the woman explained, noticing Isaiah's curious glance between the girls. "Grace feels everything that happens to Emma, sometimes before it happens." Isaiah worked silently, his large, scarred hands surprisingly gentle as he removed bits of fabric and dirt from the wound. When it was finally clean, he applied a poultice of herbs, then wrapped the arm in a clean bandage. Willow bark tea for the fever, he said, moving to the fire where a pot already simmered. Both need it, you too, from the look of you. The woman accepted the steaming cup he offered, helping first one daughter and then the other to sip the bitter liquid before taking any herself. My name is Sarah, she said finally. Sarah Whitcomb. These are Emma and Grace. Isaiah nodded once but offered no name in return. Names created connections, and connections were dangerous, to him and now to them. Reynolds men, he asked instead, nodding toward the direction of her destroyed homestead. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. You know of the Feud? No, enough. Territories too big for secrets, too small for hiding. He poured himself a cup of the willowbark tea. Why'd they target your family? Sarah's hand trembled as she stroked Grace's hair. My husband, Thomas, wasn't born a Whitcomb. He married into the family, married me, had no part in the old hatred. Her voice caught, but that didn't matter to the Reynolds. Said any man who slept under a Whitcomb roof was fair game. Isaiah absorbed this information silently, its implications disturbing the careful isolation he had constructed. If the Reynolds clan had marked this woman and her children for death as part of their vendetta against the Whitcombs, sheltering them, even temporarily, placed him directly in the path of a blood feud he had spent years avoiding. How long had you been out there? He asked, assessing Emma's bandaged arm with clinical detachment. Since dawn, Sarah replied. Exhaustion, evident in her voice. The attack came at first light. Thomas and his brother James died trying to hold them off while I escaped with the girls. Her eyes filled with tears she was too proud to shed. James was leaving today for Fort Carlson to fetch the marshal. They must have known. Isaiah said nothing, but his expression darkened. Fort Carlson was a 4-day ride in good weather. Even if the marshal were inclined to intervene in a family feud, unlikely given the frontier code that kept lawmen out of private disagreements, help would come far too late. Outside, the storm descended in full fury, sealing them in a white cocoon that separated them from the rest of the world. For now, at least, Isaiah's decision had been postponed by forces beyond his control. No one would be traveling in either direction until the blizzard passed. In the workshop corner of his one-room cabin, the half-completed restoration of a Dakota bow lay on his workbench, awaiting his return to the familiar solitude of his craft. But for the first time in 9 years, Isaiah Stone found himself occupied with a different kind of work, the preservation of life rather than the solitary rituals of survival. As night fell on the hidden cabin, the hunter sat vigil beside the unconscious woman and her children, watching for signs of improvement or decline, prepared to battle death with the same precision he brought to tracking game. Though he wouldn't have admitted it even to himself, something long dormant had awakened within him, a connection to the world of the living, with all its messiness and vulnerability, its pain and its promise. The blizzard raged through the night, burying the prairie beneath 3 feet of fresh snow, and howling around the cabin like a living creature denied its prey. Within the shelter's sturdy walls, Sarah Whitcomb finally surrendered to exhaustion, slumping beside her daughters on the fur pallets. Isaiah covered her with a buffalo robe, then returned to his position by the hearth, rifle across his knees, a sentinel against dangers both remembered and anticipated. 3 days passed before Emma Whitcomb opened her eyes. The blizzard had intensified beyond all expectations, shrouding the prairie in a white silence broken only by the occasional cracking of branches under their snow burden. Isaiah had maintained constant vigilance, catching sleep in brief intervals, while monitoring the twins' fevers that had stubbornly resisted his herbal remedies. On the second night, when Emma's temperature had spiked dangerously high, he'd resorted to more desperate measures, packing snow around her small body while her mother and sister watched with terrified eyes. The gamble had paid off. By dawn of the 3rd day, her breathing had steadied and the unnatural flush had receded from her cheeks. Grace had proven the more resilient twin, fighting through her sympathetic fever with surprising strength. During her waking hours, she had watched Isaiah with unnervingly solemn eyes that seemed to evaluate his every movement, rarely speaking but communicating volumes through her steady gaze. "You're the ghost man," she had announced matter-of-factly on the second morning, as Isaiah skinned a rabbit for the day's stew. The statement had frozen him momentarily, the phrase uncomfortably close to his Dakota name. "What makes you say that?" "Child, Daddy told us stories about a scout who vanished into the Badlands," Grace replied, her voice carrying the peculiar gravity some children possess. "Said he moved without making tracks and could disappear between heartbeats. The Indians called him a ghost." Isaiah had merely grunted and returned to his work, discomfited by how easily the child had pierced the anonymity he had cultivated for nearly a decade. It was during one such moment, with Grace balanced on a stool, watching him prepare a poultice for her sister, that Emma finally regained full consciousness. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to terror as she registered her unfamiliar surroundings. "Mama!" she gasped, attempting to rise and immediately falling back as pain seared through her wounded arm. Sarah, who had been sleeping fitfully nearby, was at her daughter's side in an instant. "I'm here, sweetling," she soothed, stroking Emma's tangled hair back from her forehead. "We're safe." Emma's eyes darted around the cabin, taking in the rough-hewn furniture, the unusual collection of weapons and native artifacts mounted on the walls, and the imposing figure of her rescuer. Recognition flickered across her face as she spotted her twin. "Grace," she whispered. "I'm right here," Grace answered, climbing down from her stool to join her sister. "The ghost man saved us." Isaiah turned away, uncomfortable with the child's persistent use of the name. He busied himself at his workbench, allowing the family their reunion while maintaining a careful emotional distance. The wound in Emma's arm would need redressing, and all three Whitcombs required proper meals to rebuild their strength, but these were practical concerns, not personal ones. At least, that's what he told himself as he methodically sorted herbs and prepared bandages, his back deliberately turned to the scene of familial tenderness unfolding by the hearth. "Thank you." Sarah's voice came from behind him, closer than he'd expected. He hadn't heard her approach, a disconcerting lapse for a man whose survival had long depended on constant vigilance. Isaiah nodded once, still focused on his preparations. "Fever's broken. Arm needs watching, but worst is past." "Not just for Emma's arm," Sarah persisted. "For everything. We would have died out there." The simple truth of this statement hung between them, inescapable and uncomfortable. Isaiah gathered the fresh bandages and herbal poultice, finally turning to face her. In the improved light of day, with the immediate crisis past, he properly saw Sarah Whitcomb for the first time. Despite the ordeal she had endured, there was an undeniable strength in her features, high cheekbones, a determined set to her jaw, and eyes that revealed intelligence beyond her probable 25 years. Her dark hair, now cleaned of travel dirt, fell in waves past her shoulders, and she had mended the torn shoulder of her dress with neat, practical stitches. "Your husband built too far out," he said, the words coming more harshly than intended. "Isolated homesteads make easy targets. If Sarah was offended by his bluntness, she didn't show it. Thomas wanted to be close to the stream for irrigation, said good water was worth more than neighbors." A shadow crossed her face. He was a dreamer, thought the feud would stay behind in Kentucky. Isaiah moved past her toward the twins, kneeling beside Emma to examine her wounded arm. The gash had begun healing cleanly, the angry red lines of infection receding. As he gently removed the old bandage, Emma watched him with wary curiosity. "Does it hurt terribly?" Grace asked, wincing slightly, though no one touched her. "Only when I move it," Emma replied softly, her eyes never leaving Isaiah's face. Pain means healing, he told her, applying the fresh poultice with surprising gentleness for hands so large and weathered. Dead flesh feels nothing. The practical wisdom seemed to comfort the child, who nodded solemnly. Like Grandpa Walker used to say, only the living complain about the cold. Isaiah's hands stilled briefly at the name. Walker, our mother's father, Sarah explained, returning to her daughter's side. A Kentucky mountain man who never quite adapted to civilization. The coincidence of the name, so similar to his Dakota title, unsettled Isaiah, though he kept his expression neutral as he finished bandaging Emma's arm. Storm's passing, he announced, rising to check the small window where pale sunlight had finally begun filtering through thinning clouds. Another day before trails are possible. The unspoken implication hung in the air. Once the weather cleared, decisions would need to be made about the Whitcombs' future. Decisions Isaiah had been deliberately avoiding as he focused on their immediate survival. Sarah seemed to read his thoughts. We won't impose on your hospitality longer than necessary, she said formally. Once the girls are stronger, we can make our way to Fort Carlson. Isaiah's response was immediate and uncharacteristically emphatic. Reynolds' clan would intercept you before you made 10 miles. He moved to the fireplace, stoking the embers with more force than necessary. They'll be watching the obvious routes. You seem to know a great deal about them, Sarah observed, studying him with new intensity. Know enough to avoid them, Isaiah replied. Same as I avoid most trouble in this territory. Until we brought trouble to your door, she concluded softly. The statement held no accusation, merely acknowledgement of reality. Isaiah did not contradict her. Instead, he retreated to his workbench, creating physical distance that emphasized the emotional barriers he maintained. It was Grace who bridged this careful separation, following him with the fearless curiosity of childhood. She watched silently as he organized his tools, then asked abruptly, "Why do you live alone, ghost man?" "Grace," Sarah admonished. "That's not polite to ask." Isaiah considered ignoring the question, as he had others. But something in the child's direct gaze demanded honesty even as it discomfited him. "Simpler that way," he answered finally, adjusting the placement of a skinning knife on his bench. "People complicate things." "But you're sad," Grace stated, with unsettling certainty. "I can see it behind your eyes." The observation, coming from a 5-year-old child, struck too close to truths Isaiah had long denied, even to himself. Before he could formulate a response, Sarah intervened, gently guiding Grace back toward her sister. "Remember what we discussed about personal questions," she reminded her daughter. "Not everyone wishes to share their thoughts." Isaiah used the interruption to escape outside, ostensibly to check his livestock and gather more firewood. The cold air cleared his head, the familiar rituals of practical survival restoring his emotional equilibrium. By the time he returned, arms laden with split logs, he had re-established the careful distance that had preserved his sanity these many years. The remainder of the day passed in relative quiet. Sarah helped the twins change into clean clothes. Isaiah had found in an old trunk garments left behind by previous occupants of the cabin before he had claimed it as his own. Though far too large, the fabric provided fresh covering while Sarah washed their travel-stained dresses. As twilight descended, Isaiah prepared a more substantial meal than usual. Venison stew enriched with dried vegetables and wild onions he had preserved for winter. The twins ate with surprising appetite, their bodies demanding sustenance to continue healing. "Where did you learn about medicines?" Sarah asked as they ate, nodding toward the herbs hanging from the cabin rafters. "Your remedies aren't like any I've seen before." Isaiah concentrated on his stew, uncomfortable with personal inquiry, yet recognizing the natural curiosity behind her question. "Spent time with the Dakota," he answered finally, "before the troubles. Their healers understand this land's plants better than any Washington doctor. You lived among them. Sarah's voice held surprise, but not judgment. 5 years, learned their language, their ways. Isaiah's tone discouraged further questions, but Sarah seemed determined to understand their reluctant host. That would be before the Spencer Creek incident, she ventured carefully. Isaiah's head snapped up, his eyes suddenly cold. You know that name. It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered anyway. Everyone from Kentucky to the Dakota Territory knows it. The massacre was in all the Eastern papers. She hesitated, then continued with cautious honesty. When Grace called, "You ghost man," I began to wonder. "Are you Isaiah Stone?" The name hung in the air between them, unspoken for nearly a decade, yet never fully escaped. Isaiah set down his bowl, his appetite gone. The twins, sensing the sudden tension, watched with wide eyes. "That name belongs to a dead man," he said finally, his voice deliberately even. "Dead and buried at Spencer Creek with 54 settlers. Who trusted him?" "But you survived," Sarah pressed gently. "No, something wearing my skin walked away." Isaiah stood abruptly, moving to the fire rather than meeting her gaze. "The man who led those people died with them." Sarah was silent for a long moment, weighing her response. When she spoke again, her voice carried a compassion that cut deeper than accusation. "The papers said you disappeared after the military. Inquiry cleared you, that no explanation was ever found for why the Sioux spared you alone." Isaiah stared into the flames, seeing not the hearth before him, but the nightmarish tableau that haunted his dreams, wagons burning, women and children falling beneath arrows and war clubs, and Chief Red Cloud standing before him with unfathomable eyes. "They didn't spare me," he said, the words emerging unbidden after years of silence. "They sentenced me." Understanding dawned on Sarah's face. "To live with it." Isaiah nodded once, the simple gesture containing volumes of unspoken grief. "Red Cloud knew me from the years I lived among his people. Said death would be mercy I hadn't earned. Said I must carry the weight of those souls until the Great Spirit decided otherwise." The admission, extracted after so many years of isolation, seemed to drain something vital from Isaiah. He remained by the fire, his broad shoulders slumped in a posture of defeat that contradicted everything about the formidable man who had saved them. Sarah approached slowly, stopping just beyond arm's reach, respecting the invisible boundary he maintained. "Did you lead them into ambush knowingly?" she asked, her voice free of accusation, seeking only truth. "No." The denial came without hesitation. "But I ignored signs I should have read, chose speed over caution, pride over wisdom." He turned to face her, his eyes reflecting firelight and old pain. "Made myself believe I knew the territory better than the warriors born to it." Sarah absorbed this confession, her expression thoughtful. "So you've sentenced yourself to solitude as penance?" "As protection," Isaiah corrected. "For others, from me. Decisions I make affect only myself now." "Until we came," Grace interjected, unexpectedly from across the room, her childish voice somehow carrying the weight of prophecy. Isaiah glanced at the child, disconcerted by her perception. Before he could respond, Emma spoke up, her voice weaker but equally certain. "You were waiting for us," she stated with the simple conviction of youth. "That's why you stayed here all these years." The twins' strange assertions broke the tension, replacing it with an awkward silence that Sarah finally bridged. "Forgive them," she said, offering a small smile. "They sometimes say odd things. Thomas called it the mountain sight, something passed down from my father's people." Isaiah grunted non-committally, but the twins' words had penetrated his armor, in ways Sarah's gentle questioning could not. The suggestion that his isolation might have purpose beyond penance, that his self-imposed exile might lead to something other than slow dissolution. These notions disturbed the careful narrative he had constructed around his existence. As darkness claimed the prairie beyond the cabin walls, Each occupant retreated into private thoughts. The twins eventually succumbed to sleep, their small bodies curled together on the fur pallet like mirror images. Sarah sat mending their clothes by firelight, her efficient hands continuously busy despite her own exhaustion. Isaiah moved to the window, studying the clearing sky with a tracker's practiced eye. Stars had begun appearing, their cold light reflecting off the snow-covered landscape with crystalline clarity. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine white canvas unmarked by human passage. But that would change. With the weather clearing, the Reynolds clan would resume their search for the surviving Whitcombs. The tracks leading from the burned homestead had been buried by the blizzard, but experienced hunters would establish search patterns, understanding that a woman and 2 children on foot could only have traveled a limited distance. Additionally, Isaiah's own presence in the territory, though deliberately obscured, was not entirely unknown. Occasional traders and trappers had glimpsed him over the years, and rumors of the Ghost Scout persisted in frontier settlements. If the Reynolds men were thorough in their inquiries, those rumors might lead them eventually to his hidden cabin. The practical problem before him demanded solution. Once Sarah and the twins were strong enough to travel, they would need safe passage to civilization, not the nearest settlement where Reynolds' influence might reach, but somewhere far enough to escape the blood feud's long shadow. As if sensing his thoughts, Sarah spoke from her place by the fire. "What happens when the snow clears?" Isaiah turned from the window, his expression grave. "Depends on how badly the Reynolds want to finish what they started." "They won't stop," Sarah replied, her hands stilling on her mending. "Jeremiah Reynolds watched his father die at my grandfather's hands 30 years ago. He's sworn that no Whitcomb will live to see another generation." Her eyes drifted to her sleeping daughters. "The girls are the last of the line. While they live, his vengeance isn't complete." Isaiah considered this with the tactical precision that had once made him the Army's most valued scout. "Fort Carlson's no safe haven, then? Reynolds has connections there?" Sarah nodded. "The quartermaster is his wife's cousin, and the marshal—" She hesitated. "The marshal looks the other way, on matters between established families." "The territorial capital, then," Isaiah suggested, mentally calculating distances and risks. "Governor's justice might prove less flexible than frontier law." "It's a 2-week journey in winter conditions," Sarah countered, "and we'd need to cross Reynolds' ranch lands to reach the main road." The logic was inescapable. Any conventional route to safety would expose them to their pursuers, which left only unconventional options, paths so difficult or dangerous that no one would expect a young woman and 2 small children to attempt them. Isaiah's mind turned to the canyon lands to the north, a maze of rock formations and hidden valleys known only to the native peoples and a handful of trappers who had earned their trust. He had spent 2 winters exploring those remote passages, mapping them in his memory as potential escape routes should his past ever catch up to him. Now that knowledge might serve a different purpose. "There's another way," he said finally, his decision crystallizing with unexpected clarity. "Northern route through the winding rock canyons, 3 days hard travel to reach the entrance, then another 4 through the maze itself. Comes out near Fort Hastings on the Montana border, beyond Reynolds' influence." Sarah studied him, understanding the implications of his words. "You'd guide us there?" Isaiah met her gaze directly. "Couldn't send you blind. Be certain death." The simple statement carried the weight of commitment that Isaiah had avoided for 9 years. Sarah recognized this, for she studied his face with new intensity. "Why would you risk yourself for us? You've gone to extraordinary lengths to separate yourself from the world, yet you'd hazard everything for strangers." Isaiah turned back to the window, uncomfortable with her directness. The question demanded an answer he wasn't sure he possessed or was willing to acknowledge. "Been carrying ghosts long enough," he said finally, the words emerging rough-edged and reluctant. Maybe time to guard the living for a change. Outside, a coyote howled at the rising moon, its lonely call echoing across the snow-covered prairie. Inside the cabin, something fundamental had shifted, a decision made, a course set, a solitary existence disrupted beyond any possibility of return to what had been before. As the night deepened around them, Isaiah Stone found himself contemplating a future suddenly, dramatically unfamiliar after years of numbing sameness. Whether this change represented salvation or damnation remained to be seen. But as he watched Sarah return to her mending, her face softened by firelight as she sat protectively near her daughters, he recognized that the path forward, however perilous, held something his isolation never could: purpose. The week following the blizzard brought an uneasy routine to Isaiah's cabin. As Emma's wounded arm healed and the twins regained their strength, Sarah insisted on contributing to the household despite Isaiah's initial reluctance. By the fifth day, she had reorganized his meager supplies, established a proper washing station near the hearth, and transformed the chaotic pile of furs that had served as their sickbed into comfortable sleeping arrangements for herself and her daughters. Isaiah observed these changes with conflicting emotions. The practical side of him acknowledged that Sarah's efficient management improved the cabin's functionality. The part that had embraced solitude bristled at each small alteration. To his carefully constructed world, "Your provisions won't last through February if we remain," Sarah remarked one morning as she inventoried his food stores. "Not with 5 mouths to feed." Isaiah, repairing a broken snowshoe by the light from the window, grunted non-committally. "Set fresh trap lines yesterday. Basin to the east usually yields winter rabbits." Sarah nodded, bouncing Grace on her knee, while Emma sorted dried herbs according to Isaiah's earlier instructions. "I could help with preparation if you bring something back. I'm not helpless in the kitchen." "Never suggested you were," Isaiah replied, his attention seemingly fixed on the intricate lacework of the snowshoe. "But your leg still favors the right. No sense reopening that gash." The observation, evidence of his habitual awareness of their physical conditions, drew a small smile from Sarah. "Yes, Mr. Stone," she replied, a hint of warmth in her voice that made him glance up sharply. The familiarity disconcerted him. During the days of their recovery, Sarah had made numerous attempts to learn more about their rescuer, and Isaiah had deflected each inquiry with increasing discomfort. Yet she persisted with gentle determination, gradually uncovering fragments of his past through observation and the occasional unguarded comment. "You're afraid," Grace announced suddenly, her solemn eyes fixed on Isaiah's face. The blunt assessment from a 5-year-old child halted his hands on the snowshoe. "What makes you say that, little one? You watch the window every hour, check the ridgeline before sunrise. Listen to the wind like it's talking." Grace tilted her head, studying him with unnerving intensity. "Not afraid for you, afraid for us." Isaiah met the child's gaze, surprised by her perception. Before he could formulate a response, Emma added, from her place at the herb table, "The bad men are coming, I dreamed it." Sarah's expression tightened with concern. "Emma, we don't need to trouble Mr. Stone with your dreams." But Isaiah set aside the snowshoe, his full attention now on the twins. "What did you see in this dream?" Emma exchanged a glance with her sister, that mysterious unspoken communication passing between them. 3 riders. One has a silver star on his hat. One has a red beard. One has no fingers on his left hand. The description sent an imperceptible chill through Isaiah. The physical details matched the Reynolds brothers with disturbing accuracy, details the child could not possibly know through conventional means. Just coincidence, he told himself. Frontiers full of men with beards and missing digits, yet the precision nagged at him, resonating with old Dakota beliefs about children born with the seeing eye. Twin seers were especially revered among the Plains tribes, considered bridges between the physical and spirit worlds. "When did you have this dream?" he asked, keeping his voice deliberately casual. "Last night," Emma replied. "They were following tracks in the snow, but the tracks weren't ours, they were something else's." Isaiah rose, moving to the window with practiced nonchalance that belied his inner disquiet. The basin stretched before him, pristine white under the midday sun, undisturbed save for the distant movement of wildlife. "Your dream's just that, child," he said finally. "No tracks lead here." Yet even as he spoke the reassurance, his experienced eye caught an anomaly on the distant ridge, a momentary flash of light, like sun reflecting off metal or glass. A rifle barrel, perhaps, or binoculars. Decision crystallized instantly. "Sarah, get the children away from the windows," he instructed, his voice calm but commanding. "Move to the back wall." Sarah responded immediately to the authority in his tone, gathering the twins and retreating to the designated position without question. Once they were safely away from potential sightlines, Isaiah dropped to a crouch below the window frame, extracting a brass spyglass from a nearby shelf. Carefully, using only the minimum exposure necessary, he trained the glass on the ridge where he'd noted the reflection. For several moments, he saw nothing but undisturbed snow and rock outcroppings. Then, as he began to think he'd imagined the flash, a figure appeared briefly along the ridgeline, a mounted man in a heavy coat, leading 2 additional horses behind him. "What is it?" Sarah asked, her voice hushed as she noted his sudden stillness. "Rider, on the north ridge," Isaiah replied, continuing his methodical scan of the surrounding terrain. "Alone now, but leading extra mounts. Advanced scout, most likely." "Reynolds' men?" "Can't be certain at this distance." Isaiah lowered the spyglass, his expression grave as he turned to face her. "But they're well equipped, moving with purpose. Not typical trappers or traders." The implications hung between them, unspoken, but unmistakable. Their sanctuary had been compromised sooner than anticipated. The question now was whether the cabin itself had been spotted, or if the riders were simply establishing a search pattern through likely territory. Isaiah moved with practiced efficiency, gathering essential supplies and weapons. "We need to clear out, now while there's still daylight." "I thought the plan was to wait until Emma's arm fully healed," Sarah protested, though she was already helping the twins into their warmest clothing. "Plans change when circumstances change," Isaiah replied, removing a floorboard to reveal a hidden cache of ammunition and dried food. "Visitor on the ridge changes everything." "Could they have followed your tracks from the trap lines?" Sarah asked, expertly rolling blankets into tight bundles. Isaiah shook his head. "Set those lines using every precaution. No backtracking, no direct routes." His expression darkened. "More likely, someone at the trading post connected the stories, rumors, of a solitary cabin in this region, rumors of a woman and twins who escaped the Reynolds attack." As he spoke, he retrieved a small leather case from the hidden compartment, opening it to reveal detailed hand-drawn maps. "We'll take the western exit route. Less exposed, though harder going. Connects to the northern canyon path eventually." Practical urgency of preparation temporarily eclipsed fear. Within 20 minutes, they had assembled the essentials for winter travel: snowshoes for Sarah and Isaiah, a modified toboggan for the twins, weapons, food, and the minimum tools necessary for survival. Everything packed with the precision of a man who had planned for rapid evacuation many times before, though never executed it. "You've prepared for this," Sarah observed, as Isaiah distributed the weight between packs with careful calculation. "Prepared. For everything," he corrected, adjusting the final straps. "Consequence of living with ghosts. Always expect them to send company." Before they could depart, Grace tugged urgently at Isaiah's sleeve. "The old way," she whispered, pointing toward the stone chimney. "Like Grandfather Walker showed the slaves." Isaiah stared at the child, unnerved by her apparent knowledge of something she couldn't possibly have seen. The hidden exit tunnel, a narrow passage he had discovered beneath the foundation when first claiming the cabin and subsequently expanded, was known to no one but himself. "What old way, sweetling?" Sarah asked, confusion evident in her voice. Isaiah made a swift decision. "She's right," he admitted, moving to the hearth and pressing a concealed mechanism that caused a section of the stone floor to shift. "There's a tunnel. Runs 30 yards to the western slope, hidden by boulders." Sarah's eyes widened. How could Grace possibly know about that? "Mountain sight," Isaiah replied grimly, using the term Sarah herself had introduced. "Questions for later. Now we move." The tunnel proved a tight fit for adults, requiring them to crouch as they navigated the earthen passage reinforced with timber supports. The twins, smaller and more agile, moved through with relative ease, treating the escape as an adventure rather than a desperate flight. "Grandfather helped build this," Grace announced confidently as they emerged from the hidden exit into a small rocky hollow, sheltered from view by a natural formation of boulders. "Hush now," Sarah cautioned, though her expression revealed her own confusion at her daughter's impossible knowledge. Isaiah secured the tunnel entrance, disguising it to appear as a natural rock fall. Only the most determined search would reveal the passage, though he harbored no illusions about the tenacity of men driven by generations of blood hatred. "Stay low. Follow exactly in my tracks," he instructed, securing the toboggan harness across his broad shoulders. The conveyance, designed to distribute weight optimally while providing shelter for the twins, was his own innovation. Practical, efficient, and built for speed rather than comfort. They set off westward, using the broken terrain and sparse pine copses for concealment. Isaiah set a challenging pace, balancing the need for swift distance from the cabin against Sarah's still recovering strength. The twins remained remarkably quiet in their toboggan, understanding without being told the vital importance of silence. By mid-afternoon, they had covered nearly 5 miles of difficult country, maintaining a course that deliberately avoided obvious trails or natural pathways. Isaiah selected their route to minimize exposure on ridgelines, while avoiding the deepest snowdrifts that would slow their progress. As they paused in the shelter of a granite outcropping to rest and take water, Emma suddenly clutched her sister's hand, both children going rigid simultaneously. "They've found the cabin," Emma whispered. "3 men," Grace added, angry at the empty hearth. Isaiah and Sarah exchanged troubled glances. The specific detail, not just discovery but the exact emotional response of their pursuers, carried an unsettling weight of authenticity. "How far behind us?" Isaiah asked, accepting the twins' vision without skepticism. He had witnessed, too, much unexplained phenomena among the Dakota to dismiss such warnings. "Looking for the secret door," Emma replied. "The one with no fingers is touching the stones." Isaiah's jaw tightened. If the Reynolds men discovered the tunnel, they would know with certainty that the cabin's occupants had fled recently. The hunt would intensify, with trackers potentially picking up their trail, despite his precautions. "We need to accelerate," he decided, adjusting their course slightly northward. "There's a ravine 2 miles ahead. Flash flood carved it last spring. Difficult passage but hard to track through." Sarah nodded, readjusting her pack without complaint, though exhaustion shadowed her eyes. The twins settled back into the toboggan, their small faces solemn, with a comprehension that seemed beyond their years. They reached the ravine as dusk approached, a jagged scar cutting through the prairie where violent spring waters had carved a new path through the ancient rock. Its steep sides and boulder-strewn bottom created a challenging obstacle, but one that offered both concealment and confusion for anyone attempting to follow their trail. "We'll make camp here tonight," Isaiah announced, selecting a defensible position beneath an overhanging ledge, sheltered from wind, hidden from sightlines above. The natural formation provided protection on three sides, requiring defense only from the front. Isaiah established their camp with military precision, fire set in a rock depression that dispersed the smoke while minimizing visible light, sleeping positions arranged for both warmth and rapid evacuation if necessary, and subtle early warning. Systems placed at strategic intervals around their perimeter. As Sarah settled the twins for the night, Isaiah conducted a careful reconnaissance of their back trail, climbing to a vantage point that permitted observation without exposure. The dying light revealed no immediate signs of pursuit, but experience had taught him that absence of evidence wasn't evidence of absence. The Reynolds men were hunters after all, and hunters knew how to move without advertising their presence. Bernard. He returned to camp. Sarah had prepared a spare but nourishing meal from their provisions, pemmican softened in hot water with dried berries added for substance. The twins ate without complaint, though the plain fare was far different from the comfortable life they had known before violence had shattered their world. "Will they find us?" Sarah asked quietly after the girls had drifted to sleep. Exhaustion finally overcoming their anxiety, Isaiah added a small branch to their carefully contained fire, buying time to consider his response. False reassurance would serve no one, yet unmitigated truth might destroy the hope needed to continue. "They'll try," he answered finally. "Reynolds' men are experienced trackers, but so am I, and I know this territory better." Isaiah extracted his hand-drawn map, indicating a sheltered valley beyond the canyon system. "Hunter's cabin here, abandoned trading post from before the wars. 3 days' journey for you at careful pace. I'll approach from the south after circling. Back likely 2 days behind. 5 days apart in hostile territory," Sarah summarized, the prospect clearly troubling her. "Necessary risk," Isaiah replied, though the words provided little comfort to either of them. He knelt beside the toboggan, addressing the twins directly. "You mind your mother now. Do exactly as she says. No arguments. I'll find you at the cabin." The girls regarded him solemnly, their identical expressions reflecting an understanding beyond their years. Without warning, Grace reached out and touched his scarred cheek with small, cold fingers. "You'll come back different," she pronounced with unsettling certainty. "But you'll come back." The simple prophecy, delivered with absolute conviction, affected Isaiah more deeply than he could acknowledge. He merely nodded, rising quickly to his feet and turning to the practical matter of dividing their supplies. Within minutes, the essential separation had been accomplished. Sarah and the twins, equipped for a slower but steadier journey toward the canyon sanctuary, Isaiah prepared for a more aggressive evasion strategy designed to attract pursuit. Final instructions were exchanged, landmarks confirmed, contingencies established. Then came the moment of actual parting. Sarah hesitated, clearly struggling with words adequate to the situation. "Be careful," she said finally. The simple phrase, containing volumes of unspoken meaning. Isaiah nodded once, his expression betraying nothing of the turmoil beneath his stoic exterior. 3 days to the cabin," he repeated. "I'll find you." With that inadequate farewell, they separated. Sarah guiding the twins toward the ravine's eastern fork, Isaiah moving with deliberate visibility toward the western passage. Behind them, still unseen but drawing closer with each passing minute, the Reynolds hunters and their tracking hounds followed the scent of prey into the shadowed depths of the winter ravine. The eastern fork of the ravine narrowed dangerously, as Sarah guided the twins deeper into its shadowed confines. Weathered walls rose 30 feet on either side, occasionally closing to barely 6 feet apart, creating natural choke points that slowed their progress but would equally hamper any pursuit. The toboggan scraped against stone outcroppings, requiring frequent adjustments and careful navigation around obstacles Isaiah would have handled with practiced ease. "Mama, I'm cold," Emma whispered as they paused to navigate a particularly challenging section where fallen rocks created a natural barrier. "I know, sweetheart," Sarah replied, adjusting the buffalo robe around her daughters. "We'll keep moving, and that will warm us up." Grace studied the sky, visible in the narrow strip above them. "Storm coming," she announced with that unsettling certainty. "Big one, like the night Papa died." Sarah followed her daughter's gaze, noting only a few scattered clouds in the pale morning sky. Experience had taught her not to discount the twins' predictions, however impossible they seemed. "How soon?" "Tomorrow," Emma answered before her sister could speak, "when the sun touches the broken mountain." The cryptic reference meant nothing to Sarah, but she filed the warning away, accelerating their pace as much as safety permitted. The ravine continued its winding path northward, gradually ascending toward higher elevations where the walls began to diminish, offering occasional glimpses of the wider landscape beyond. By midday, they had emerged onto a rocky plateau scattered with wind-sculpted pines that provided intermittent cover. Sarah paused to orient herself using Isaiah's map, identifying the distinctive twin peaks that marked the entrance to the canyon system, still several hours' journey across exposed terrain. "We'll rest here," she decided, finding a sheltered position behind a cluster of boulders. "Eat quickly. We need to reach better cover before nightfall." The twins accepted the cold pemmican and dried berries without complaint, their small faces solemn, with an awareness of danger that no 5-year-old should possess. As they ate, Grace suddenly stiffened, her hand finding her sister's in that familiar gesture of shared vision. "They split up," she whispered. "Two follow Ghostman, one follows us." "With both dogs," Emma added, her voice trembling slightly. Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. Isaiah's strategy had partially succeeded, drawing the majority of their pursuers away, but the division of forces meant at least one experienced hunter remained on their trail, equipped with tracking hounds bred specifically for winter pursuit. "Which one follows us?" she asked, dreading the answer. "The one with no fingers," Grace replied. "The meanest one. Jebediah Reynolds, the youngest of the 3 brothers, but by reputation the most vicious, a man who had lost his fingers to frostbite during a blizzard and blamed the Whitcomb family for the injury sustained while pursuing their cattle. Sarah had seen him only once, at a territorial fair years earlier, but his cold eyes and mutilated hand had left an impression that time hadn't diminished. Decision crystallized immediately. Their current route across open terrain would leave them hopelessly exposed to a hunter with dogs. They needed an alternative path, one that would neutralize the animal's advantage. Sarah studied the map again, noting a thin blue line that intersected their planned route about 2 miles ahead, a stream marked as Devil's Cut that ran through a narrower section of rocky terrain before eventually joining a larger river system. Water would mask their scent, potentially confusing the dogs long enough to gain precious distance. "Change of plans," she told the twins, quickly repacking their supplies. "We're going to follow a stream for a while. It might be cold, but it will help us stay safe." Grace nodded with immediate understanding, while Emma clutched her wounded arm, the pain seemingly intensified by fear. Sarah positioned the toboggan to shield them from the wind, then scanned their back trail once more, seeing nothing yet, but understanding that absence of visual confirmation meant little against hounds bred to track humans across impossible terrain. They set off at a pace that balanced urgency against caution, Sarah constantly evaluating their surroundings for tactical advantages or potential threats. Isaiah had taught her the basics of wilderness movement during their week together. Walk on rocks when possible, use natural features to break sight lines, minimize disturbance to vegetation that might signal passage. The stream appeared ahead, As the afternoon waned, a ribbon of dark water cutting through the rocky landscape. Parts had frozen over, but the center still flowed freely, evidence of a spring-fed source that resisted winter's grip. Sarah guided them down the embankment, testing the depth with a branch before committing to their new course. The water's shallow enough to walk in, she determined, helping the twins from the toboggan. We'll need to carry the supplies between us. Can you both manage a small pack? The girls nodded solemnly, accepting the lightweight bundles Sarah prepared for them. Their toboggan would need to be abandoned, too difficult to manage in the streambed and too distinctive a target for pursuers. She concealed it beneath a rock overhang, hoping to eliminate at least one obvious sign of their passage. We're going to walk in the water now, Sarah explained, adjusting Emma's coat more securely around her wounded arm. It will be very cold, but the cold protects us, understand? The dogs can't smell us in the water, Grace confirmed, demonstrating that unnerving awareness that continued to surprise Sarah despite repeated instances. They entered the stream together, the shock of the frigid water drawing gasps from all three despite their mental preparation. Sarah positioned herself downstream of the twins, ready to catch either child should they slip on the slick, moss-covered rocks beneath the surface. Progress slowed dramatically in these challenging conditions. Each step required careful placement, and the numbing cold rapidly sapped their energy reserves. After 20 minutes, Emma began to lag noticeably, her wounded arm clearly causing additional distress in the punishing conditions. A little further, Sarah encouraged, though her own feet had lost almost all sensation. Just around that bend ahead. The mentioned bend revealed a welcome surprise, a section where the stream had carved a small cavern beneath an overhanging rock face, creating a natural shelter partially hidden from view by a frozen waterfall. Sarah guided the twins toward this unexpected haven, helping them climb onto the relatively dry ledge behind the ice curtain. We'll rest here, she decided, noting Emma's increasing pallor and Grace's exhausted shivering. Get dry and warm before continuing. Working quickly despite her numbed extremities, Sarah removed their soaked footwear and replaced it with the spare wool stockings Isaiah had included in their packs. She wrapped both girls in the buffalo robe, encouraging them to huddle together for shared warmth, while she established a small, nearly smokeless fire, using the techniques she had observed during their time in the cabin. As circulation painfully returned to her extremities, Sarah used the opportunity to assess their situation. The stream strategy would significantly complicate the dog's tracking abilities, but Jebediah Reynolds was renowned for his winter hunting skills. The delay would be temporary at best. The unexpected shelter offered a momentary reprieve, but remaining stationary invited eventual discovery. They needed to continue moving as soon as the twins had recovered sufficient strength, perhaps another hour at most, before the encroaching darkness would force a decision between traveling at night or establishing a defensible position until morning. Sarah consulted Isaiah's map again, trying to correlate their current position with the marked features. The stream continued northward, eventually intersecting with the canyon system they sought, but following its entire length would add hours to their journey and keep them in the punishing cold of the water. Alternatively, they could return to land after another mile, cutting directly toward the canyon entrance, across more exposed terrain, but potentially reaching shelter before complete darkness fell. As she weighed these options, Grace suddenly clutched her sister's hand. Both children, going rigid with their now familiar shared vision. "He's at the place where we left the sled," Grace whispered. "The dogs are barking." "They found our trail," Emma added, her voice tiny with fear. Sarah felt her heart rate accelerate. The mental calculation was simple and terrifying. If Jebediah had already discovered the abandoned toboggan, he was less than an hour behind them. The stream strategy had bought them critical time, but not nearly enough. "How long until nightfall?" she asked, more to herself than the twins. 2 hours, Grace answered anyway. "But the storm comes sooner. Snow will hide us." Sarah studied her daughter's face, searching for any hint of uncertainty in the prediction. Finding none, she made her decision. "We'll follow the stream for another half-mile, then cut overland directly toward the canyon. The storm will cover our tracks." The twins accepted this strategy without question, their trust in her judgment both heartening and terrifying in its completeness. After ensuring they had warmed sufficiently, Sarah efficiently repacked their supplies, keeping only essentials and caching the remainder in the cave behind a pile of rocks, a precaution against the possibility of needed emergency supplies. On their return journey, they re-entered the frigid water as the afternoon light began to fade, moving with greater confidence despite their exhaustion. The twins demonstrated remarkable resilience, following Sarah's instructions without complaint, though the cold clearly pained them. After the designated distance, they emerged onto the snow-covered bank, Emma stumbling slightly as sensation returned, painfully to her numbed feet. "Just a little further," Sarah encouraged, pointing toward the distinctive twin peaks now clearly visible on the near horizon. "See those mountains? That's where we're going. There's shelter there." The open terrain between stream and canyon offered little concealment. Sarah set a direct course, moving as rapidly as the twins' endurance permitted. The sky had darkened considerably in the past hour, heavy clouds rolling in from the west with unnatural speed, exactly as Grace had predicted. The approaching storm simultaneously represented their greatest ally and a potentially lethal threat, depending on whether they reached adequate shelter before it struck full force. They had covered perhaps half the distance to the canyon entrance. When Sarah heard it, the faint but unmistakable baying of tracking hounds carried on the strengthening wind. The sound froze her momentarily, primitive fear competing with rational thought for control of her actions. "He's coming," Emma whimpered, clutching her sister's hand. "The storm is coming faster," Grace countered, her eyes on the darkening sky. Race between them. The simple assessment clarified Sarah's options. They couldn't outrun tracking hounds across open terrain, but the approaching blizzard might blind both dogs and master if it arrived in time. Their only viable strategy was acceleration toward the canyon entrance, gambling everything on reaching defensible terrain before either pursuer or storm caught them fully exposed. "We run now," Sarah decided, gathering the twins close. "No stopping until we reach those rocks. Understand?" Both girls nodded, their small faces set with determination beyond their years. Sarah took each by the hand, and together they broke into the fastest pace the children could maintain across the snow-covered ground. Behind them, the hounds' baying grew steadily louder, the gap closing with every passing minute. The wind strengthened dramatically as they ran, the first heavy snowflakes beginning to swirl around them. Within minutes, visibility had decreased. By half, the canyon entrance now visible only as a darker shadow against the grey-white backdrop of the gathering storm. The blizzard's arrival simultaneously hindered their progress and obscured their trail, a double-edged salvation that Sarah desperately hoped would favour them over their pursuer. The hounds' voices changed suddenly, their tracking bays shifting to the higher-pitched excitement that signaled visual contact with their quarry. Sarah risked a glance backward and glimpsed a dark figure on horseback, perhaps a quarter-mile behind them, two large dogs running ahead of the mounted man. "Don't look back," she instructed the twins, increasing their pace despite Emma's increasingly labored breathing. "Just run for the rocks." The canyon entrance loomed ahead, its distinctive twin peaks now barely visible through the thickening snowfall. As they closed the final distance, the terrain became increasingly broken, large boulders and rock formations creating a natural labyrinth at the approach. Sarah navigated by instinct, pulling the twins behind a massive stone outcropping just As the first rifle shot cracked behind them, the bullet struck snow 10 feet to their right, the shooter's aim compromised by distance and deteriorating visibility. But the message was clear. Jebediah Reynolds had them in sight and was done with pursuit. The endgame had begun. "Stay low," Sarah ordered, pulling both girls down behind the protective bulk of the boulder. "Crawl toward that dark space between the rocks. Don't stand up, no matter what you hear." The twins obeyed instantly, dropping to their hands and knees and scuttling toward the indicated crevice, a narrow passage between two towering rock formations that might offer access to the canyon beyond. Sarah followed close behind, shielding their small bodies with her own, as another shot rang out. This one striking stone far to their left, the increasing snowfall had become their most effective protection, reducing visibility to mere yards, and confusing the tracking hounds, whose voices now reflected uncertainty rather than pursuit confidence. As they reached the crevice, barely wide enough for an adult to pass sideways, Sarah made a tactical decision, born of desperation. "You two go through first," she instructed, helping Emma navigate the narrow opening. "Follow the passage as far as you can. I'll be right behind you." "You're lying," Grace stated flatly, her solemn eyes meeting Sarah's with that disconcerting adult awareness. "You're going to make noise, so he follows you instead of us." The simple articulation of her unspoken plan startled Sarah. "I'll find you," she promised, avoiding direct confirmation. "Just like Isaiah will find us. But you need to go now." Grace regarded her for a long moment, then nodded once, a gesture so like Isaiah's that Sarah felt a pang of recognition. "3 rocks that look like bears," the child said. "That's where we'll wait inside." With that cryptic guidance, Grace slipped through the crevice after her sister, the two small forms disappearing into the shadowed passage beyond. Sarah waited only long enough to ensure they had cleared the immediate area, then, deliberately, moved away from the crevice, creating obvious tracks in the accumulating snow before ducking behind a different formation. A third rifle shot sounded, closer now, but still wide of any actual target. The dogs bayed in confusion, their tracking abilities severely compromised by the combination of storm conditions and the lingering effects of the stream strategy. Sarah circled behind several large boulders, deliberately creating a false trail, leading away from the twins' actual position. Then she heard his voice for the first time, harsh, commanding, carrying despite the howling wind that now drove snow horizontally across the landscape. "I know you're there, Whitcomb woman," Jebediah Reynolds called. "Send out those devil-spawn girls and I might let you live." Sarah made no response, continuing her tactical movement between cover positions, drawing both man and dogs farther from the hidden crevice. The storm's intensity increased with each passing minute, visibility now reduced to barely 10 feet in any direction. Soon even Jebediah, experienced winter hunter that he was, would be forced to seek shelter or risk becoming disoriented in whiteout conditions. Another shot rang out, startlingly close. The bullet struck stone inches from Sarah's position, sending rock fragments spinning into her face. She ducked lower, tasting blood where a stone splinter had cut her cheek. 30 years my family's been settling accounts with Whitcombs," Jebediah shouted, his voice seeming to come from multiple directions as the wind distorted sound. "Your husband was just installment payment. Those girls are the balance due." The crude announcement of his intentions, the explicit confirmation that he sought not just to kill the twins, but to exterminate the Whitcomb bloodline completely, hardened something in Sarah that had been wavering under the pressure of fear and exhaustion. This man, this human predator who placed generational hatred above the lives of 5-year-old children, represented a threat that transcended ordinary danger. She needed not just to evade him, but to eliminate his threat permanently. The realization brought clarity rather than panic. Sarah assessed her resources. Isaiah's revolver with 6 rounds, her hunting knife, knowledge of the immediate terrain, and the intensifying storm. Against these, Jebediah had superior firearms, tracking dogs, frontier experience, and a lifetime of hatred driving his pursuit. The odds favored him in direct confrontation. Her advantage lay in misdirection and the rapidly deteriorating conditions. If she could separate him from his horse and dogs, force him to pursue on foot through the blizzard's heart, his experience might transform from asset to liability. Overconfidence, leading him into terrain where visibility and orientation became impossible. Decision made, Sarah moved with new purpose, deliberately leaving clearer tracks in specific directions while brushing away signs of her actual path with a pine branch. She worked her way gradually toward the sounds of the restless horse, identifying its position by the occasional whinny of protest against the punishing conditions. Jebediah's voice continued to ring out periodically, threatening and then cajoling. By turns, but always closer to the false trail she had created, leading away from the canyon entrance. The dogs' barking had become sporadic and uncertain, further evidence of their sensory confusion in the blizzard conditions. Sarah reached the horse's position before sighting its master, a large bay gelding tethered to a stunted pine and growing, increasingly agitated as snow accumulated on its back and wind drove ice particles against its hide. The saddlebags likely contained supplies essential for extended winter travel. More importantly, the horse represented Jebediah's primary transportation advantage. Working silently despite numbed fingers, Sarah approached from the animal's blind. Aside, speaking soft reassurances as she reached for the tether rope, the horse started nervously, but calmed under her gentle hands, recognizing human assistance even if from an unfamiliar source. With practiced motions learned during her frontier childhood, Sarah loosened the knot securing the gelding. Then, with a silent prayer of apology to the innocent animal, she slapped its flank hard, simultaneously shouting directly into its ear. The combination of stimulus triggered the horse's flight response instantly. It bolted into the storm, disappearing from view within seconds, taking with it Jebediah's supplies and fastest means of pursuit. The reaction was immediate and profane. Jebediah's enraged voice cut through the storm, followed by frantic commands to the dogs and the sound of running footsteps approaching her position. Sarah retreated rapidly, using the near-zero visibility to her advantage, circling back toward the canyon entrance while Jebediah and his hounds pursued the horse's retreat in the opposite direction. The temporary separation wouldn't last long. Once Jebediah realized the deception, he would return to his original target area, particularly if the storm eased enough to improve tracking conditions. Sarah needed to reach the twins and move deeper into the canyon system before that occurred. She retraced her path through increasingly challenging conditions, the snow now nearly knee-deep in places and still accumulating rapidly. Maintaining orientation became her primary challenge, each landmark rapidly obscured by the blizzard's white curtain. Only her deliberate mental mapping of the area during their approach allowed her to relocate the critical crevice that led into the canyon proper. The narrow passage proved even more difficult to navigate alone than it had with the twins, its confined space collecting drifted snow that impeded progress. Sarah forced her way through, emerging finally into a somewhat more sheltered area, where the canyon's high walls reduced the direct impact of the howling wind. 3 rocks that look like bears, Grace had said. Sarah scanned the shadowed recesses of the canyon entrance, searching for formations that might match the description. The declining daylight combined with storm conditions made identification difficult, but eventually she spotted the distinctive grouping. 3 columnar stones of graduated height, their wind-carved tops roughly resembling ursine heads. "Emma." "Grace," she called softly, approaching the formation. "Mama!" The response came from behind the central bear, where a narrow opening led to a small cave-like recess perfectly sized for 2 small children to shelter. The twins emerged, flinging themselves into her arms with rare abandon, their usual composure broken by the extended separation. "The bad man?" Grace asked as Sarah hugged them fiercely. "Lost in the storm," Sarah replied, not mentioning the likelihood of his eventual return. "We need to move deeper into the canyon while the blizzard covers our tracks." Emma glanced at her sister, that silent communication passing between them. "Isaiah's map shows a place 2 miles in," she said with surprising specificity. "Old cave with pictures on the walls. We can hide there." The reference to particular details from Isaiah's map, information Sarah was certain she hadn't shared with the twins, prompted another moment of disquiet regarding their inexplicable knowledge. But practical concerns overrode metaphysical questions. If they knew of better shelter deeper in the canyon, she would accept the guidance without questioning its source. "Lead the way," she told them, adjusting their coats and checking Emma's wounded arm before proceeding. They moved deeper into the canyon as true darkness fell, the storm's fury somewhat muted by the towering walls that rose hundreds of feet on either side. Their progress was slow but steady, the twins demonstrating remarkable confidence in navigating the unfamiliar terrain despite the challenging conditions. Sarah maintained vigilant awareness of their back trail, alert for any sign that Jebediah had discovered their actual direction. The ancient cave appeared much as Emma had described, a deep recess in the canyon wall, its entrance partially hidden by fallen boulders that created both concealment and protective barrier. Evidence of previous human habitation became immediately apparent as they entered. Fire-blackened walls near the entrance and deeper within, the promised pictures that proved to be faded pictographs of hunting scenes and celestial symbols. "Old. Once lived here," Grace announced with characteristic certainty. "Long before white people came, they watched the stars from this place." Sarah made no attempt to question how her daughter could possibly know this. Instead, she focused on establishing their temporary sanctuary, creating a small fire in the ancient hearth spot, positioned so the smoke would draw up through a natural chimney in the rock formation and disperse without visible plume. As the flames gradually warmed the cave's interior, Sarah tended to Emma's arm, relieved to find no evidence of renewed infection despite the day's harsh journey. The twins settled close to the fire, exhaustion finally overcoming even their remarkable endurance. Within minutes of consuming a small portion of their remaining pemmican, both had fallen into deep sleep, huddled together beneath the buffalo, robe-like mirror images of each other. Sarah maintained watch at the cave entrance, Isaiah's revolver close at hand as she periodically scanned the storm-lashed canyon below. The blizzard showed no signs of abating. If anything, it had intensified. As night fully claimed the landscape, visibility had decreased to mere feet, and the temperature continued to plummet, creating conditions that would challenge even the most experienced frontiersmen's survival skills. The harsh elements that threatened their own safety, paradoxically, provided their greatest protection against Jebediah Reynolds. Even his legendary winter hunting prowess would be tested to its limits by the combination of darkness and blizzard conditions. More likely, he had been forced to seek immediate shelter, postponing pursuit until weather conditions improved. That temporary reprieve offered little comfort, however. Sarah harbored no illusions about the man's determination or his resources. The loss of his horse would anger rather than deter him. Once the storm passed, he would resume hunting them with the single-minded focus of a predator whose prey had wounded his pride as well as escaped his grasp. The greater concern remained the unknown fate of Isaiah Stone. Had his strategy succeeded in drawing away the other Reynolds brothers? Was he maintaining his freedom of movement, or had he been cornered by superior numbers? The uncertainty gnawed at Sarah with increasing persistence as the hours passed. Against rational expectation, She had come to depend on the reclusive former scout, not merely for his wilderness skills, but for the steady presence he provided. His promised rendezvous at the trading post cabin now seemed simultaneously essential and impossibly distant, separated by days of dangerous travel through territory where enemies actively hunted them. Yet, as Sarah watched her daughters sleeping peacefully despite all they had endured, she felt a steely resolve replace earlier fear. Isaiah had risked everything to help 3 strangers who had disrupted his carefully isolated existence. She would do no less to ensure her children reached the safety he had promised, regardless of obstacles or personal cost. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, continuing their journey deeper into the canyon, managing dwindling supplies, maintaining vigilance against Jebediah's inevitable return to the hunt. But for this moment, in this ancient shelter where unknown peoples had found refuge countless generations before, Sarah Whitcomb permitted herself a fragment of hope. The storm raged on outside, nature's fury providing temporary sanctuary for the hunted. Within the cave's shadowed confines, a small fire pushed back the darkness, illuminating the twins' peaceful faces with warm light that mirrored the determination now burning in their mother's heart. The Dakota Badlands had claimed many dreams in its harsh embrace, including those of her husband. But it would not claim her daughters, not while she drew breath, and not while Isaiah Stone pursued his own parallel journey through the winter night, drawn by forces neither of them fully understood, toward their promised reunion. The abandoned trading post materialized from the swirling snow like a mirage, weathered logs and a sagging roof appearing between squalls of white, as Sarah guided the twins through the final stretch of their journey. 3 days of arduous travel through the canyon system had tested the limits of their endurance. Food supplies had dwindled to nearly nothing, and Emma's wounded arm had begun showing worrying signs of renewed inflammation. "Is that it, Mama?" Grace asked, her voice thin with exhaustion, as she pointed toward the structure. "Yes, sweetheart. That's the cabin Isaiah told us about," Sarah confirmed, struggling to keep her own weariness from her voice. "Just a little further now." The blizzard had finally broken the previous day, leaving behind 4 feet of fresh snow and bitter cold that transformed their breath into crystalline clouds. They had emerged from the protected confines of the canyon that morning, venturing into the open valley beyond, with constant vigilance against pursuit. No sign of Jebediah Reynolds had appeared since the night of the storm. Whether he had abandoned the hunt due to the loss of his horse and supplies, or simply been delayed by the extreme conditions, remained unknown. Sarah maintained constant awareness of their back trail regardless, trust in their escape tempered by bitter experience. As they approached the trading post, Sarah noted signs of its long abandonment: broken windows, hastily covered with rawhide, a collapsed section of porch, the skeletal remains of a wagon half buried in snow beside the structure. Yet smoke curled from the stone chimney, rising straight. In the windless afternoon, Sarah halted instantly, pulling the twins behind a stand of stunted pines. Someone had reached the cabin before them. The question was whether it represented salvation or threat. "It's Isaiah," Grace announced with characteristic certainty. "He's hurt, but alive." "Reynolds' men hurt his leg," Emma added, the twins demonstrating that unsettling shared knowledge that still disquieted Sarah despite repeated instances. Hope warred with caution as Sarah studied the cabin. If Isaiah had indeed reached their rendezvous point ahead of schedule despite injury, it represented their best possible outcome. Yet blind acceptance of the twins' vision risked walking them directly into danger if they were mistaken. "Stay here," she instructed, positioning the girls in a sheltered hollow beneath a snowdrift. "If I signal, come quickly. If I shout or you hear anything worrying, run back toward the canyon and hide in our last camp." The twins nodded solemnly, their exhaustion, momentarily overshadowed by the gravity of the situation. Sarah checked Isaiah's revolver one final time, then began a careful approach, utilizing the techniques he had taught her for moving across snow with minimal sound or visible disturbance. As she neared the cabin, details emerged that supported the twins' assertion. A horse was tethered in a lean-to beside the structure, not Jebediah's bay, but a dun gelding she recognized as one of Isaiah's mounts. Fresh wood had been stacked beside the entrance, the cutting style matching Isaiah's distinctive technique. Most convincingly, the defensive measures around the perimeter reflected his tactical thinking, carefully arranged sightlines, subtle, early warning indicators, and concealed shooting positions that would allow a single defender to control all approaches. Sarah reached the cabin's weather-worn door, hope now outweighing caution. She knocked once, then called softly, "Isaiah, it's Sarah." Silence followed, then the distinctive sound of a rifle hammer being cocked. "Step left of the door, into clear view," came the response. Isaiah's voice, but strained with what might be pain or exhaustion. Sarah complied, understanding his caution. She moved into the open, hands visible, presenting herself as a clear target should this prove to be a trap. The door opened slowly, revealing Isaiah Stone, alive but visibly diminished. He leaned heavily on a makeshift crutch, his right leg bound in blood-stained bandages. His normally weathered face appeared gaunt, eyes sunken from what appeared to be days of pain and inadequate rest. "Sarah," he acknowledged, relief evident despite his controlled expression. "The twins?" "Safe." "Hidden nearby," she replied, fighting unexpected emotion at seeing him alive despite his obvious injuries. "I needed to confirm it was really you." Isaiah nodded once, approval glinting through the pain in his eyes. "Prudent precaution. Bring them in quickly, temperatures dropping with sunset." Sarah signaled the twins, who emerged from hiding and rushed toward the cabin with more energy than she had seen from them in days. Their reaction to Isaiah's injured state proved telling. Neither showed surprise, merely solemn acceptance as they entered the relative warmth of the trading post's main room. The interior bore Isaiah's distinctive organizational imprint despite his impaired condition. Supplies were arranged with military precision, defenses established at key points, and a fire burned steadily in the stone hearth, radiating precious heat throughout the space. "The Reynolds brothers?" Sarah asked as she helped the twins out. "Of their snow-crusted outer garments." "Dead," Isaiah answered flatly, making his way painfully back to a chair positioned for optimal coverage of both door and windows. "Both of them. Caught them separated in the North Ravine. Clean shots." The simple statement, delivered without elaboration, explained volumes about his condition. Taking down two experienced hunters, even separated, would have required extraordinary skill and likely exposed him to significant risk. "And your leg?" Sarah nodded toward the blood-stained bandages. "Rifle round. Through and through, high on the thigh," he replied with clinical detachment. "Martin Reynolds got off a shot before. He died." Grace approached without invitation, her small hand reaching toward Isaiah's injured leg. Before Sarah could intervene, the child had placed her palm gently on the bandaged wound. "Hot inside, fighting poison," she stated with that disconcerting certainty. Isaiah studied the girl with narrowed eyes, neither accepting nor rejecting her assessment. "Your sister needs attention first," he countered, gesturing toward Emma's inflamed arm. Fresh poultice ingredients on the table there. The practical necessity of tending to immediate medical needs temporarily superseded other concerns. Sarah applied a fresh poultice to Emma's wound, using the herbs Isaiah had prepared, while he maintained his vigilant watch at the cabin's main window. Once the twins were settled near the fire with small portions of the stew Isaiah had managed, To prepare despite his injury, Sarah finally addressed the question that had haunted her throughout their journey. "Jebediah Reynolds, have you seen signs of him?" Isaiah's expression darkened. "No, but he's out there. Man like that doesn't quit a blood feud, especially now his brothers are gone." "I cost him his horse and supplies during the blizzard," Sarah explained. "He may have been forced back to their ranch to re-equip. Bought us time then," Isaiah acknowledged, "but not resolution. He'll return with more men once he learns his brothers aren't coming back." The implications hung heavy in the cabin's close air. One immediate threat had been eliminated, but their sanctuary remained temporary at best. Jebediah would eventually track them to this location, potentially with additional hired guns, to compensate for his brother's absence. "We need to move on," Sarah concluded, the bone-deep weariness in her voice belying the determination in her eyes. "As soon as you can travel." Isaiah studied her with unexpected intensity. "You handled yourself well, getting the twins through the canyon during a blizzard, evading Jebediah. Not many could manage that." The simple acknowledgement from this taciturn man carried more weight than effusive praise from another source might have. Sarah allowed herself a small smile of genuine gratitude. "I had an excellent teacher," she replied. "Even if we only had a week's worth of lessons." Something shifted in Isaiah's expression, a subtle softening around eyes that had remained hard for 9 years of self-imposed exile. "Taught me something too," he admitted, the words emerging reluctantly, "about living instead of just surviving." Before Sarah could respond to this unexpected disclosure, Grace spoke up from her position by the fire. "Time to stop running," she announced with that strange adult certainty. "He's coming tomorrow at first light. Alone." "Jebediah," Emma confirmed without being asked. "Very angry, very afraid." The twins' pronouncement created immediate tension. Isaiah straightened despite obvious pain, his tactical mind visibly reassessing defensive options given his limited mobility. Sarah moved instinctively toward her daughters, maternal protection overriding fatigue. "How would he find us so quickly?" she asked, the question directed partly to Isaiah and partly to the twins themselves. "Followed the smoke, maybe," Isaiah suggested, "or found sign where you exited the canyon." "He always knew where the trading post was," Grace countered with unsettling logic. "He was letting us run until we were tired, like when Papa hunted deer." The comparison with a predator's tactics sent a chill through Sarah that had nothing to do with the winter temperature. Emma and Grace had articulated a strategy so coldly calculating it seemed impossible, yet it aligned perfectly with what they knew of Jebediah Reynolds' character. "If he comes alone, he's overconfident," Isaiah assessed, tactical analysis overriding concern. "Gives us advantage despite my condition." Sarah recognized the implication immediately. "We prepare an ambush." Isaiah nodded once, approval evident in his gaze. In that moment of shared understanding, something crystallized between them, a partnership forged through shared danger and mutual respect that transcended their brief acquaintance. As night descended on the abandoned trading post, they worked together to establish a defensive strategy that would turn Jebediah's confidence against him. Isaiah's experience and Sarah's determination combined to transform the weathered structure into a carefully planned tactical environment where even his injured condition became an asset rather than limitation. The twins eventually succumbed to exhaustion, sleeping peacefully near the hearth while the adults completed preparations. In the quiet that followed, Sarah finally asked the question that had remained unspoken since their reunion. "What happens after tomorrow, if we survive?" Isaiah was silent for a long moment, his weathered face revealing an internal struggle unlike his usual stoic demeanor. "Been thinking about Montana," he said finally, Territories opening up, new settlements, less history, place where a widow with two unusual children might start fresh. He paused, then added with careful neutrality, place where even a man with my reputation might find some peace. The implication hung between them, not a proposal exactly, but an opening, an acknowledgement that whatever tomorrow brought, the paths that had converged in that Dakota cabin might continue forward together rather than separating again. The twins would like Montana, Sarah replied, accepting the unspoken offer with characteristic directness, and I suspect they'd insist their ghost man come along. A rare smile touched Isaiah's lips, brief but transformative, revealing the man who had existed before Spencer Creek and might exist again with the right companions for the journey. Outside, the Dakota night deepened toward dawn, stars wheeling above the snow-covered valley in their ancient patterns. Within the cabin's protective walls, 4 people who had been strangers mere weeks before prepared to make their stand, not just against a single determined enemy, but against the isolation and pain that had defined their separate pasts. Tomorrow would bring its reckoning with Jebediah Reynolds. Beyond that lay a future none of them could clearly envision, yet all somehow understood would be shared. The twins slept peacefully, their extraordinary perception temporarily set aside in childhood. Slumber. Sarah and Isaiah maintained vigilant watch, their communication now comfortable in its silences, a lifetime of understanding somehow compressed into days of shared struggle. The Dakota Badlands had nearly claimed them all through violence, weather, and pursuit. Instead, it had forged something unexpected from the fragments of their broken lives, something that resembled, against all reasonable expectation, a family. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.